Hi, I'm Silas Dreyer. The night I got engaged was the night my life quietly ended. Everyone was smiling, champagne, laughter, music. But my mother's eyes wouldn't meet mine. She slipped a napkin to a waiter, told him, "Give this to my son. Don't let anyone see." When I unfolded it, her handwriting shook. "Son, you must leave now. She's not marrying you for love." I thought it was just fear, until I realized every word was true. And by the time I understood why, my family had already erased me. So tell me, how far would you go when the people who raised you decide you don't exist anymore? The sky over the Cooper River was painted in the kind of gold that photographers chase but never quite capture. The air was thick with laughter, champagne bubbles, and that particular southern warmth that hides every truth behind a perfect smile. Guests wandered through the lantern-lit garden, toasting to our happiness, their words dripping with sincerity I didn't believe. Marina stood across the patio, her white dress catching the glow of the sunset. She was flawless, graceful in every gesture, camera-ready, even when she didn't know anyone was watching. Every time she laughed, people around her leaned in closer, as if her approval meant something. I had thought, for a long time, that it did. My mother, Evelyn, stood by the buffet table, glass in hand, her back too straight to be comfortable. She wasn't watching the river, or the guests, or even me. She was staring at Marina's father, across the garden, her knuckles white around the stem of her glass. No one else noticed, but I did. I always did. When I was a boy, I used to measure her mood by how she held her glass. Firm meant anxious. Gentle meant safe. Tonight, her hand trembled just enough to make me uneasy. "Everything okay, Mom?" I asked when I passed her by. She forced a smile, the kind that doesn't travel to the eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. I'm just proud." Her voice cracked on the last word. Then she turned, pretending to listen to someone else's story. The music swelled, a soft jazz melody that felt too perfect, too rehearsed. The air hummed with chatter, silverware clinking, and camera shutters. I should have been happy. I should have been celebrating. But something inside me felt hollow, as if the night were being held together by thin, fragile glass. A waiter approached me, young, polite, eyes lowered. "Sir," he said quietly, handing me a folded napkin. "For Mrs. Dreyer." Then he disappeared into the crowd before I could thank him. At first, I thought it was a simple note, maybe a reminder about some guest I'd forgotten to greet, or one of her little "don't drink too much, Silas" warnings. But when I unfolded it, I felt my stomach twist. Her handwriting was shaky but clear. "Son, you must leave now. She's not marrying you for love." For a second, I thought the lights had dimmed, but it was only my vision tightening, closing in on the words, the laughter, the music. It all became distant, muffled, like someone had closed a door between me and the world. I read it again, then again. Each time it hit differently. I looked for her across the garden, but she wasn't where she'd been. Just a half-empty champagne glass stood on the table. My first thought was denial. Maybe she misunderstood Marina. Maybe she heard gossip from one of those southern socialites who live to destroy other people's happiness. Mom had always been protective, sometimes too much. Maybe this was just another case of her overreacting. But then I looked toward Marina again. She was laughing with my brother, Victor. His hand rested just a little too long on her shoulder. She didn't move it away. Victor raised his glass and called out loud enough for everyone to hear, "To the future of our family legacy." The crowd cheered. Marina smiled. My chest tightened. "Our family legacy. Not your, not his, our. Victor always had a way of making everything sound like it belonged to him, even when it didn't. I forced a smile, lifting my glass when someone nudged me. To the future, I echoed, though the words burned in my throat. The napkin was still in my palm, crumpled, damp from sweat. I slipped it into my jacket pocket before anyone could notice. For the next hour, I went through the motions, smiling for photos, shaking hands, listening to jokes I didn't hear. Marina kissed my cheek once for the camera. Her lips were cold. I wondered if she could feel me flinch. Every so often, I glanced toward the buffet table, expecting to see my mother, but she didn't return. Neither did the waiter. When the speeches ended and the guests began to drift toward the riverside bar, I excused myself. I needed air. The laughter followed me as I walked down the stone path to the water's edge, where the lights reflected like broken glass on the dark river. The night breeze carried the scent of gardenias and something metallic, faint, like rain that hadn't come yet. I leaned on the railing, pulling out the napkin one more time. The ink had bled slightly, but the words still cut clear. I tried to imagine my mother writing it, her hands shaking, her voice caught between warning and heartbreak. What had she seen? What did she know that I didn't? Behind me, someone laughed, a high, familiar sound. Marina's, followed by Victor's deeper tone. I closed my eyes, jaw tightening. Maybe Mom wasn't wrong. Maybe she was just late in telling me what I'd been trying not to see. The river kept moving, silent and steady. I stayed there, watching it, until the party's music began to fade. When I finally turned back toward the garden, the lanterns flickered in the distance. The guests were still celebrating, toasting to a love story already cracking at its edges. But one thing was missing. My mother was gone. And so was the waiter who'd given me the note. I moved quickly, cutting through the chatter and soft music, back toward the lantern-lit garden. The laughter behind me felt thinner now, more like background noise than something I belonged to. I scanned the space where the waiter had been. Nothing, just empty air and half-eaten plates. The napkin was still in my hand, creased and damp, as though my palm had absorbed some of its urgency. Inside the mansion, the light felt colder, less forgiving. The rich wood floors, the gilded mirrors, the floral centerpieces. All looked like part of a stage I hadn't realized I was performing on. I headed toward the kitchen corridor, hoping to catch the waiter there, or maybe someone who knew him. "Excuse me," I asked one of the catering staff near the wine station, the guy who brought out the hors d'oeuvres earlier, young, tall, black vest. "Have you seen him?" The woman barely looked up. "I just got here. Maybe ask someone from the main team." I did. I asked 3 different people. None of them knew who I was talking about. "He had no name tag?" one of them asked, clearly annoyed. "No, just said he was from Mrs. Dreyer." She shook her head and walked away. That did it. My mother didn't hire servers herself. She barely even got involved in party planning. Victor's wife usually handled everything. So why lie? I made my way down the hallway toward the music room, trying to piece it together. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone wanted to mess with me. But then why disappear? Why the urgency? Why would my mother scribble something that heavy just to vanish? The hall narrowed near the parlor. I heard laughter, low and casual. A voice followed. Victor's. I slowed my pace and turned toward the partially closed door. Inside, Marina sat on the piano bench, sipping wine. Victor leaned against the mantel, drink in hand. Her leg was crossed toward him. Her hand brushed his sleeve as she laughed. "Relax," she said, her voice playful. He's already halfway in love with the story we sold him." Victor chuckled. "He always is. Frame it right, and he'll sign anything." Marina raised her glass. "To loyalty." Victor clinked his glass against hers and said, "To family investments." I didn't breathe. Sign anything? I took a step back, heartbeat rising in my throat. The napkin felt heavier now. My first instinct was to barge in, demand an explanation, make them say those words again to my face. But instead I turned and walked, slowly, deliberately, back toward the main hall. I needed time to think, to see clearly. Victor. My brother. The one who taught me how to tie a tie when Dad stopped showing up. The same man who once punched a kid in high school for calling me soft. He couldn't be doing this. And Marina. I'd known her 3 years, shared my bed, my hopes, my damn passwords. She wouldn't, but I heard them. Their voices weren't distorted or muffled. They weren't joking. "Frame it right, and he'll sign anything." I stopped at the bottom of the staircase, trying to catch my breath without looking like I needed to. "Hey, babe," Marina's voice rang out behind me. She caught up, smile bright as ever. "Where'd you go?" "Just needed a breather." I forced a smile, like a reflex. She stepped in close and adjusted my collar. "You okay? You look pale." "I'm fine." I glanced at her hand, still holding her wine glass. No tremor, no hesitation, not a flicker of guilt. She leaned in and kissed my cheek. Light, hollow, practiced. Across the room, Victor watched us. He raised his glass and smirked. Guests began gathering near the grand staircase, where the photographer was arranging a group shot. Someone called out, "Family photo time!" Marina tugged my arm. "Come on, handsome. You're the man of the hour." I let her pull me forward. The crowd was already forming. Marina beside me, her father to her left, Victor on my right. "Let's get everyone tight," the photographer called out. Then Victor stepped forward, half a step, just enough to stand between me and the camera lens. The photographer didn't correct it. No one did. Flash. And just like that, I wasn't in the frame. I stood there, frozen for a second too long, before stepping back and pretending it didn't matter. Later that night, when I saw the photo posted on Marina's cousin's social feed, it hit me harder than anything they'd said behind that door. I was supposed to be the groom, but the photo had captured exactly what I was starting to fear. I'd already been written out. 2 weeks later, Charleston's summer heat had turned the air into something you could almost chew. I sat at a corner table of a small cafe off East Bay Street, the kind with chipped wooden tables and old jazz playing too quietly to notice. The place smelled like roasted beans and the damp pages of old newspapers, fitting since I was staring at one. The headline took up half the page. "Dreyer Legacy Expands with New Family Alliance." Just beneath it, a full-color photo of our engagement party, the riverside garden, the champagne, the perfect smiles. I studied the image for a long moment before I noticed what was missing. My name. The caption listed every person in the frame: Victor Dreyer, Marina Holloway, Evelyn Dreyer, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway. And then, instead of Silas Dreyer, it said simply, "Family Representative." It wasn't a typo. It wasn't oversight. It was removal. I blinked hard, reading it again, tracing the line with my thumb as though the ink might rearrange itself and make sense. But it didn't. I was gone. Just like from the photo. Just like from that night. I folded the paper slowly, took a long sip of coffee that tasted like burnt wood, and told myself this was a printing error. Mistakes happen. Names get left out all the time. So I pulled out my phone and called the number listed at the bottom of the page. Charleston Daily Gazette, Community Desk. Charleston Daily, this is Tracy, a voice answered. Hi, yes, my name's Silas Dreyer. I was featured in today's article. Well, I should have been featured. I think there's been a printing error in the caption. There was a short pause, fingers clacking on a keyboard. All right, let's check. Article title: Dreyer Legacy Expands with New Family Alliance. Another pause, then her tone shifted slightly. Sir, according to our copy, that's the text we received from the Dreyer Holdings PR department. The press release didn't include your name. I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. That's impossible. I'm part of the family. It was my engagement. I understand, sir, but the submission we got was final and approved by their communications director. It lists Victor Dreyer as the family representative. Victor? Yes, sir. I hung up before she could finish. The line clicked into silence. I just sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, trying to keep my pulse steady. Victor hadn't just stood in front of me for a photo. He was rewriting the story. I leaned back in my chair, letting the hum of conversation around me fade. The article lay open beside my cup, all glossy and celebratory. Every word felt like a knife. Silas? A voice said softly from across the cafe. It was Hannah, a young journalist I'd met years ago when she covered one of our company's charity events. She looked hesitant, glancing around before slipping into the seat across from me. I shouldn't even say this, she began, lowering her voice. But I thought you should know. Your brother's been talking to editors at the Gazette. My throat felt dry. About what? He told them you're stepping away from Dreyer Holdings to focus on personal matters. That the engagement is part of a transition plan. Transition plan? I repeated. Yeah, it sounded like a soft way to explain distance. She gave me a look that said she already knew what it meant. I just thought you deserved to know. I nodded, though the air around me suddenly felt too tight to breathe. Thanks, Hannah. When she left, I sat there staring at the street through the window, the slow crawl of traffic, the reflection of my own face in the glass. A man still dressed in the shell of who he thought he was. I pulled out my phone again and scrolled to Marina's contact. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I called. She answered on the second ring, her tone smooth, careful. Hey, you. I was just thinking about you. Were you? I asked. Then maybe you can explain why my name's missing from the article, or why Victor's apparently telling people I'm stepping away from the company. A short pause, then softly, Silas, it's just PR. You know how these things work. Don't make it bigger than it is. I could picture her expression perfectly. That calm, polished look she used when she wanted to shut down an argument before it started. So you knew, I said quietly. It's not a big deal. Right, I said. Not a big deal. We said our goodbyes, though it didn't sound like either of us believed the word. After hanging up, I sat for a long time, staring at the napkin still folded in my wallet. The one with my mother's warning. She's not marrying you for love. Every piece was falling into place now, but not in the way I'd hoped. If they could erase me from a caption, what else could they erase? My position at the company? My equity? My reputation? The thought burned through me, but this time it wasn't humiliation that followed. It was clarity. I paid for my coffee, left a generous tip out of habit, and stepped into the heavy summer air. The street was quiet, save for the low rumble of a passing truck. I started walking toward the office, my mind already running through documents, contracts, agreements. I'd built part of that company myself, the financial arm, the partnerships, the charity division. Every signature had my name on it, but I'd never bothered to check what came after the signatures. That was about to change. As I reached the corner, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. A voice, low, almost casual, said, "Stop asking questions, Silas. Some stories aren't meant to be rewritten." The line went dead before I could speak. For the first time since that night by the river, the fear wasn't paralyzing. It was sharp, awakening. The message had done its job. It kept me awake. For 3 days, sleep came in fragments, broken by the weight of that final line. "She's not who you think she is." I assumed it meant Marina. Who else could it be? But suspicion had layers, and the deeper I dug, the less certain I became about anything, or anyone. The more I reviewed the company filings, the more I realized this wasn't some rash betrayal. It was organized, timed, and tidy. So I waited until just past 9:45 p.m. that Thursday evening, when most of the Dryer Holdings staff had clocked out. I parked around the back and entered through the supply door using the old security fob I'd never returned. Most people assumed I'd resigned. No one was expecting me. The building had that particular hush. Humming lights, humming air, like everything had paused to take a breath. I took the elevator to the executive floor, stepped into the hallway, and made my way toward the locked records room just past Victor's office. I still remembered the key code. Once inside, I moved fast. My fingers had purpose now. Flipping through file drawers marked by fiscal quarter and department, investments, philanthropy, acquisitions. My department. I opened the most recent file. A partnership agreement I remembered drafting with a tech incubator in Charlotte. My name had been on every page. I'd overseen the negotiations myself. Now, every page had one name, Victor Dryer, Acting Managing Director. I stood motionless, eyes fixed on the word acting. It wasn't just a replacement. It was a positioning, a narrative. I scanned the date of the contract's finalization. Exactly 4 days after my engagement party. I opened 2 more folders, then 3, all showed the same pattern. And then I found it. An internal memo from the HR department stating that Silas Dryer is on personal leave effective immediately, duration undetermined. Below it, a scanned signature block. My name. Slanted wrong. Ink too clean. I'd never seen this document in my life. They hadn't pushed me out with force. They'd done it like a soft edit, erasing me with the ease of backspacing a word. I sat in the corner of the room, my back against the filing cabinet, letting the files fall open in my lap. The cold from the tile floor seeped into my legs. "They were waiting for you to celebrate before they took everything," I muttered aloud. The words felt foreign in my mouth, but true. The next morning, I arrived at the boardroom just after 8 a.m., uninvited and unapologetic. I wore the same gray suit I used to wear when I still believed my seat meant something. Marina was already seated. Her eyes flicked to me briefly, then down at the stack of papers in front of her. Victor stood by the head of the table, sipping espresso like he didn't have a care in the world. I didn't speak until every board member had taken their place. Then I slid the printed memo across the table toward Victor. "This says I'm on personal leave," I said. "Funny, I don't recall asking for time off." The room went still. One man adjusted his tie. Another woman coughed gently, trying to diffuse tension that no one had words for. Victor barely glanced at the paper. "Silas," he said evenly, "you've been under a great deal of pressure. I spoke with Mother, and we agreed it was best to give you some space. Time to recalibrate." Recalibrate, I repeated, my voice level. Marina didn't look up. This isn't about stress, I continued. This is about control. You didn't even ask me. You decided. Victor leaned forward, folding his hands. You're my brother. I love you. But the company needs clarity, not chaos. And frankly, lately, you've seemed unstable. I almost laughed. That's rich, coming from the man who just forged my signature. Victor didn't flinch. You're upset. I get it. But let's not make this ugly. Too late for that. The meeting dissolved shortly after. No one said much. No one had to. I walked out first, leaving the memo where it lay. By nightfall, I was back in my apartment, sitting at the dining table under the yellow light of the floor lamp. My apartment was quiet, painfully so. No TV, no music, just the steady scratch of my pen marking the contracts one by one. A red underline for every changed title, a blue circle for every forged note, a black X where my signature had been replaced. The napkin from the engagement night lay beside the final folder. Its corners were curled now, the words still faintly visible in my mother's shaky hand. She's not marrying you for love. At the time, I thought I knew what she meant. My phone buzzed. I reached for it, expecting junk mail or another calendar alert I'd forgotten to delete. The text lit up my screen. You're getting close. She's not who you think she is. I stared at it, my stomach tight. The message didn't feel like it was about Marina anymore, and that thought sat with me, heavy and unshakable. It kept me restless through the week, gnawing at me even when I tried to focus on work or whatever was left of it. When the noise in my head became too loud to bear, I knew where I needed to go. Home. Not the apartment. The real home. The old Dreyer estate on the outskirts of Charleston, where the magnolia trees hung heavy and the air always smelled faintly of salt and dust. I hadn't been there in months, not since the engagement party. I told myself I was just checking on my mother, but deep down, I wanted to see what she was hiding. The drive was long and quiet. The narrow road wound between rows of oaks dripping with moss, sunlight flickering through the leaves like a strobe. When I finally pulled into the gravel driveway, the house looked the same, elegant, but dim. The shutters were closed, even though it was barely noon. Harold, the old caretaker who'd worked for our family since before I was born, opened the door before I could knock. He gave me a look, polite, but uneasy. "Morning, Mr. Silas," he said, his voice carrying that soft coastal drawl. "Didn't know you were coming." "Just a surprise visit," I said, forcing a smile. "How's she been?" He hesitated. "Tired, mostly. Keeps to herself these days." He stepped aside, and I entered the house. The air smelled faintly of old perfume and lemon polish. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked like it was keeping secrets. I found her in the parlor, sitting in her usual armchair near the window, light cutting across her face in thin ribbons. She didn't look surprised to see me. "You shouldn't have come," she said quietly, without turning her head. "I wanted to see you," I replied, though the truth was sharper. I wanted answers. She gestured toward the chair across from her. "Sit then." We talked in small sentences, about the garden, about how Victor had been visiting for business matters, about how she hadn't been sleeping much. She poured tea, her hands trembling just slightly. At one point, she rose to fetch sugar from the kitchen. I followed her without thinking. Old habit. And that's when I noticed it. A narrow gap behind the tall oak cabinet near the doorway, where the wallpaper was slightly torn. I moved closer. The panel behind the cabinet was loose. When I pressed it, It clicked open just enough to reveal a small compartment. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, worn smooth from years of handling. My name wasn't on it, but I knew it belonged to her. The initials ED were embossed faintly in the corner. I opened it. The first entries were dated more than 20 years ago. Line after line of handwritten transactions. Bank transfers from Evelyn Dreyer's private account to Victor Dreyer Holdings. The amounts varied, but the notes beside them were always the same. For protection. My stomach sank. I flipped further. The handwriting changed slightly over the years, but the pattern didn't. Payments. Regular ones. All labeled for protection. When I returned to the parlor, she was sitting there again, her tea untouched. The ledger hung loosely in my hand. "Mom," I said softly, "what is this?" She didn't even look at it. "You shouldn't have gone looking." "I wasn't looking," I said. "It was right there. You've been paying him. For years." She closed her eyes. "Silas. Why? What did he make you do?" Her silence was louder than any confession. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin, like it might shatter. "Your father's death left everything in Victor's hands. The company, the estate, the lawyers. I thought if I gave him what he wanted, if I let him believe he had control, he'd leave you alone." My throat tightened. "You knew what he was doing. You knew he was rewriting me out of my own life." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't deny it. "I thought I was keeping you safe, Silas." "Safe?" I repeated. "You can't protect someone by letting them disappear." The words hung between us, heavy and final. She looked at me the way only a mother can, both proud and broken at once. I didn't say goodbye when I left. I just picked up the ledger, walked down the hall, and stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun. The air outside felt cleaner, sharper, like truth itself. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking, not from anger this time, but from understanding. The betrayal didn't start with Marina. It didn't even start with Victor. It had roots that stretched back decades, hidden beneath family dinners and polite smiles. I started the car and drove. Halfway down the long road back to the city, my phone lit up. A voicemail icon blinked on the screen. I pressed play. Marina's voice came through, quiet but trembling. "Silas, please, don't come to the wedding tomorrow. It's not what you think." Her voice cracked, and then the message ended. I didn't slow down. I just tightened my grip on the steering wheel and kept driving. The ledger on the passenger seat. The truth finally beside me. By the time the sun set, I wasn't sure if I was chasing answers or running straight into them. But when dawn came, there was no turning back. I'd barely slept, just stared at the ceiling of my apartment with the ledger open on the nightstand and Marina's voicemail echoing over and over in my mind. "Don't come to the wedding tomorrow. It's not what you think." But I did go. Not because I wanted to save anything. I just needed the truth to be spoken out loud. Finally and fully. I parked 2 blocks from the riverfront chapel. The streets were already closed off, lined with white roses strung along iron fences. A string quartet rehearsed softly by the chapel steps, bowing their instruments like everything was normal, like this was love. I walked slowly, deliberately. I wasn't wearing the boutonniere they'd arranged. My tie was knotted, my suit pressed, but there was something different in how I moved, like a man walking toward the edge of something and not afraid of the fall. Inside the chapel, everything looked like a magazine spread. Pale blue glass vases on each pew, rows of family friends murmuring in hushed tones, smiles layered over secrets. My mother sat near the front, her hands folded tightly over her lap, her eyes refusing to meet mine. Her pearl earrings, the ones she only wore for public appearances, seemed to tremble slightly with her. Victor stood at the altar, his grin wide and smooth, the kind of confidence that didn't ask for permission. Marina's father leaned toward him, chuckling about something I couldn't hear. And Marina. She looked like porcelain, pale, polished, fragile. Her smile was locked in place, but her eyes were scanning, searching. They stopped on me. She didn't blink. There was a lull. Some delay with the officiant, or maybe it was just the universe pausing. I stepped to the side aisle, quietly motioned for her to follow. She came without a word. We stood in the small alcove behind the chapel's side wall, between the stained glass panels. I kept my voice low. "Why did you really do this?" I asked. She looked down, then pulled something from her bouquet. Not a flower, but a folded piece of paper. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." The paper trembled in her hand. She passed it to me. I unfolded it, a prenuptial agreement already signed, but not by her, not even by me. Victor's signature. She kept talking, her voice cracking. "He told me, if we got married, the assets would align. You'd inherit your stake, but once we merged, he'd have control. He promised no one would get hurt. Just money and names." "So I was the name," I muttered. "A placeholder for trust fund logistics." She didn't answer. I walked back into the chapel with the contract in my jacket pocket. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, like it knew exactly what had to happen next. The music swelled as the officiant stepped forward. Victor adjusted his cufflinks and looked toward the aisle. Marina took her, placed beside him, hands clenched. I stepped forward. "Before we begin," I said, loud enough to cut through the organ's final note, "I'd like to make a small correction." Heads turned. I pulled the contract from my pocket, holding it up with 2 fingers. "This isn't a wedding, it's a merger." Gasps erupted. Someone in the third pew dropped their phone. Marina's father's face drained of color. Victor didn't move. He didn't flinch. I kept going. "This document was signed by Victor, not me, not Marina. A pre-signed prenup. The kind of thing you prepare when love isn't involved. Only leverage." I reached into my coat again, pulling the leather-bound ledger, now flagged with tabs and sticky notes. "This," I said, setting it beside the contract on the altar, "is a 20-year trail of hush money, asset transfers, and family loyalty sold off piece by piece." I looked to my mother. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, like a figure carved out of regret. Victor finally spoke. "Silas, this isn't the place." "Oh, I think it's exactly the place," I said. Calm, controlled. "You spent years making sure I stayed quiet, thinking I wouldn't look. You used Marina. You rewrote me out of my own family's story. But every lie leaves fingerprints." Marina sobbed. Someone shouted, "Is this real?" I didn't wait for the chaos to build. I simply turned, stepped down the aisle, and walked out into the sunlight. Reporters were already gathered outside. Someone had tipped them off. Maybe the journalist I met 2 weeks ago at the cafe. Maybe someone else who finally had enough of the dryer mask. One of them, a woman in a navy blazer, stepped forward with a mic. "Mr. Dryer, care to comment on the canceled wedding and corporate fraud allegations?" I paused. Let the flashes go off. Let the questions swirl. And then I smiled. Just a little. Not for show, but because for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Someone else had been watching all along. And now, The truth wasn't just mine to carry. It was in the air on headlines, rippling through breakfast tables and newsroom floors before I even opened my eyes the next morning. My phone vibrated off the nightstand. 36 missed calls, 12 voicemails, half from numbers I didn't recognize, and the rest? Journalists, former board members, even an old college friend who'd never cared enough to call before. Everyone wanted a piece of the scandal, of me. I rolled over, turned on the television. I didn't need to guess which channel. There I was, grainy footage of me at the altar, holding up the contract. This isn't a wedding, it's a merger. They played it on loop. The anchor leaned forward, voice smooth and loaded. Silas Dreyer, younger son of the Dreyer Empire, stunned guests with a dramatic interruption at what was expected to be one of Charleston's most prominent weddings of the year. Another screen split. Victor, calm, polished, sitting across from a news host in a perfectly lit studio. He's always struggled with pressure, he said, almost mournfully. We've all tried to support him, but I couldn't let his instability damage the company's future, or Marina's reputation. Instability. It was elegant, precise. He wasn't denying anything outright, just framing me as the damaged one. The brother who cracked. I didn't throw my remote, didn't yell at the screen. I just sat there, letting it all settle around me like ash after a fire. But this time, I wasn't going to be the one swept away in it. I reached for the envelope, the one I'd tucked into the side of the kitchen drawer last night. Inside, copies of the prenuptial agreement, the altered contracts, the ledger Evelyn had hidden for years. I didn't write my name. I didn't add a note. I just slid everything into a messenger bag and walked out the door. The journalist I trusted, the one who'd warned me weeks ago, answered on the second ring. I just sent you something, I said. You'll know what to do with it. Silence. Then, if this is what I think it is, Silas, it's not just family drama anymore. It's fraud. Federal. Then tell the truth, I said. No edits this time. By noon, Victor was everywhere. Local news, national headlines, morning talk shows. He had pivoted fast, painting himself as the loyal brother who had tried everything to help me. Family can be difficult, he told one anchor, his smile just faintly tinged with pain. Especially when trust is broken. No mention of forged documents. No mention of decades of manipulation. He didn't have to deny the facts. He just had to paint me as unreliable. And the world. It listens better to a man in a press suit than one holding up a truth that hurts. For a moment, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and wondered if this was worth it. If truth ever really won. Then my phone buzzed again. A new notification. Breaking. Exclusive interview with Evelyn Dreyer to air tonight at 6. I stared at the screen. I hadn't asked her to speak. I hadn't even called. 6 o'clock came. I sat on the edge of the couch, legs stiff, palms damp. The screen flickered and there she was, Evelyn Dreyer, my mother. She sat in the same parlor where I'd found her a week ago. Same window light. Same teacup beside her. But this time, no pearls, no posture, just a tired woman staring into a camera like it was a confession booth. My son Victor forged documents, she said, and I helped him hide them. I thought I was protecting the family, but what I did was allow one son to consume the other. Her voice cracked. Silas was right. He always was. I just didn't want to see it. The interviewer said nothing. The silence did more than any question could. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there, feeling everything and nothing at once. The cost of truth wasn't just our name. It was our mother. And then the phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice. On the third, I answered. "You're next," a voice said. Not loud, just matter of fact. "They won't let this lie. Be careful." Click. No name, no number to trace. But I didn't need one. I stood slowly, walked to the window. Below, cameras flashed. Reporters still lingered. Somewhere in that chaos, someone was watching. Maybe protecting, maybe hunting. Either way, I whispered it aloud, just once. "Then let them come." And for the first time, fear felt like freedom. I walked out of my apartment with the ledger heavy in my bag and the city lights folding themselves into the night like a promise. The streets smelled of rain and diesel. The air tasted like possibility. Victor had sent one text. "Meet me where it started." I read it twice and felt the years between us tighten like a rope. Dreyer Holdings rose ahead, glass and stone bleeding into the sky. The elevator hummed up to the top floor, the same one where we'd toasted a small, hopeful deal once upon a time. Back then, we were boys in matching suits, hands sticky with champagne, convinced we could build anything together. Tonight, I felt older in ways that had nothing to do with age. Victor was already at the railing, perfect as ever, the kind of immaculate that never looks natural. He had a glass of whiskey, a slow smile that didn't reach his eyes. He gestured to the city as if showing off a collection. "Congratulations, little brother," he said. "You finally freed yourself from the family burden." "You mean you freed yourself of me?" I answered. My voice was steady. The ledger was lighter in my bag than it had felt at the estate, as if paper could somehow shrink the weight of years. He laughed quietly. "You destroyed everything, Silas. You made a scene. You involved the press. You embarrassed Marina. You embarrassed our mother." "No," I said. "You did." He turned, pretending to be wounded. "You think everyone believes that old confession? A shaken woman on camera doesn't undo decades of reputation. My team will spin it. People forget. They always forget." He reached for the obvious play, doubt, pity, the slow erosion of public memory. He was banking on the world returning to its ordinary priorities: power, profit, the comfortable narratives of men who behave like gentlemen. "You think the world will move on?" I asked. "Maybe. But this time I brought my own camera." His smile faltered, a neat fracture across marble. He glanced past me and squinted. From the building across the street, under a bank of lights, a small red tally began to pulse. Victor's PR had the city, sure, but the journalist I'd trusted had a live feed and a crew on a ledge opposite ours. I watched the recognition hit him like cold water. "You brought them?" he whispered. I slid my phone from my pocket. The recorded call sat there, waveform like a confession. I hit play. Victor's voice came through crisp and ordinary, the same lilt I'd heard at dinners and board meetings. "Do it. Make it look like he took a leave. Sign his name if you have to. We'll handle the optics." The sound of it hit the glass like a bullet. For a heartbeat, Victor's composure drained. Then practiced anger. "You were never strong enough to run this family," he roared, closing the distance between us. He lunged, not with the brute force of a man unhinged, but with the controlled fury of someone who believed intimidation still worked. I didn't step back. The air seemed to hold itself around us. He shouted about legacy, about duty, about the way our father would have handled things. I watched his jaw work and felt pity for the performance more than fear. Maybe I had never wanted to run the family. I wanted honesty. I wanted to be seen. But strength comes in forms you don't always expect. Standing there, ledger on my hip, I felt something else. Not triumph, not victory. Simple, undeniable release. I turned and placed the ledger in the small drive where everyone could see them, on the jut of concrete at the edge of the rooftop. The journalist's camera caught the gesture, the feed relayed it, and a voice crackled in my ear through the reporter's earpiece. We're live. We have full access. Victor lunged again, this time desperate, words slurred. You'll ruin us. You'll ruin her. Do you hear me? You already tried, I said. You erased me. You tried to erase truth. All you ever did was rearrange people into your stories. For a moment, he looked like a man who'd lost his script. Then, sirens. Faint. Then nearer. Wound up in the distance. I could see the flashing red and blue reflecting off the office towers below. Someone had called the authorities. Someone had tipped them. Whether it was the journalist or someone inside Victor's circle who'd finally had enough, I didn't know. It didn't matter. Victor's shoulders sank as the sound closed in. He turned toward the city like a man watching a ship sink on the horizon. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I felt the emptiness where anger had lived for so long fill with a quieter thing, closure. My phone buzzed on my belt. Evelyn's name flashed, her voice trembled. Silas, she said. I don't know how to be forgiven. I only know I was trying to keep you safe. You hit us both, I said softly. But you were brave today. She didn't argue. There was something nearly like relief in her breath. On my end, the night seemed to lift a little, the city breathing along with me. The police arrived moments later, stepping onto the rooftop with careful authority. Victor's face went pale under the floodlights. Men in suits escorted him down, and I watched as the narrative I'd been trapped in for years began to unspool in the public eye. The cameras below zoomed. The feed that had been a small red dot was now a chorus. As they took him away, Victor caught my gaze. For the first time in as long as I could remember, his expression was not crafted for anyone else. It was simply human, small, exposed. A man who had built a house of lies and stood beneath it as it burned. I turned away from the railing. A breeze lifted a scrap of paper from the rooftop bin. A napkin, old and scrawled, folding itself in the wind like it had been doing everything along. It skittered across the gravel and disappeared over the edge, swallowed by the city. When the sirens faded into the night, I didn't celebrate. I didn't scream or laugh. I walked to the edge of the roof and looked out over Charleston, light steady, indifferent, patient. Some things didn't end that night. Memories don't simply dissolve when paperwork is exposed, but the worst of the quiet had been answered. In the darkness, I heard the journalist's voice again through the earpiece. He's been arrested, Silas. It's over. I let the words settle. They were true enough for now. I whispered into the wind, not a promise, not even a relief, just a recognition. When morning comes, we'll see what it brings. The wind that carried my voice that night eventually gave way to stillness. 3 months passed. The noise faded, just as noise always does. Headlines dulled to footnotes. The evening news replaced our scandal with the next fire. I didn't miss the chaos. I didn't chase resolution. I simply kept moving, one quiet hour at a time. This morning, I parked outside the old Dreyer estate. The gravel path now cracked with weeds, the shutters drawn, the garden overgrown but not quite wild. The house hadn't changed much since Victor's arrest, but I had. The keys still worked. The lock gave with a soft groan, like even it had grown tired of secrets. The air inside smelled like dust and rain, faint traces of lavender. my mother's old sachets still tucked into drawers, and something older, like memories. I came to collect what was left of my father's belongings. Not much remained. A few boxes, untouched since the funeral, a photograph of him and me at the marina, before everything splintered. Outside, in the garden, Evelyn sat beneath the awning, her shawl wrapped tightly, eyes closed. She looked thinner, but softer too, like time had exhaled around her. When she opened her eyes, she didn't flinch or startle. She simply nodded. "You did what I couldn't," she said, barely above a whisper. I pulled a chair beside her and sat. "You tried to protect me, even if it broke us both." Her eyes met mine. "It didn't break us. It changed us." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Sometimes silence answers better than words. We sat together for a while, watching a cardinal flit from branch to branch above the ivy-covered trellis. When the breeze shifted, I stood and went back inside, making my way to the small study, the one my father never let anyone else organize. The drawers still stuck. The lamp still buzzed when it turned on. Nothing had moved, and yet everything had. While sorting through a box of papers, I found it, tucked between receipts and a torn map. A napkin, folded cleanly into quarters. My breath caught, just for a second. The same shape, but the ink this time was different, neater, familiar. I unfolded it slowly. My mother's handwriting. "Proud of you. Love doesn't always come softly." There were no dates, no explanations, just that. I stood there, fingers tracing the fold, heart strangely steady. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. This one, I kept. Weeks later, I signed the final papers selling off my remaining shares in Dreyer Holdings. The company would live on without me. Or not. Either way, it was no longer mine to carry. I didn't fight for board seats or salvage what Victor left behind. I let it go. I opened a small gallery by the river. Nothing flashy. A single room, tall windows, white walls. We featured local artists, new voices, older ones rediscovered. I kept the place open late. There was something healing about standing near a painting no one else had seen yet. That river, the same one that reflected my shame during Marina's wedding, now shimmered peacefully outside the gallery glass. It hadn't changed, but I had. One evening, I sat behind the desk, sorting invoices, when the journalist who'd helped me walked in. She didn't say much, just smiled and looked around. "You did something good here," she said, eyes falling on the framed napkin on the far wall. I nodded. "Not everything worth keeping needs to be explained." She left me with a clipping from the latest paper. I didn't unfold it until the gallery closed. "Victor Dreyer sentenced to 8 years. Fraud and forgery confirmed." I didn't smile. I just folded it and slipped it in a drawer I rarely opened. Justice had its place, but it wasn't the ending I needed. My peace didn't come from his punishment. It came from my choice to step away. That night, before locking up, I walked to the far corner of the gallery. The napkin sat under soft light in a black frame, folded into the shape of a heart. She once told me to leave for my own good. Now I finally understand. Sometimes leaving is how you stay alive.